Hello lovelies, today we're taking a look at Pathfinder 2nd edition with epically bad timing because they're about to release a revised edition and this took a lot of effort and a lot of help to find, so thank you to the person who helped me find it. Because these became rare as rocking horse shit about the sort of time earlier in the year when the whole OGL fiasco hit, because a lot of people decided to abandon Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder was perhaps the obvious next choice, though possibly not Pathfinder 2nd edition. This is a hefty tome with 638 pages. Though that said, it lacks certain things that you might find in the Dungeons and Dragons player guide. Now, we can all access the internet and we can get hold of all the kinds of information and options that people have created and made up online, so you don't necessarily need the core book to be that complete. But at least with Dungeons and Dragons, you can kind of play it just from the player's guide. You don't necessarily need the other books necessarily. There's enough in there, but there's some key things missing in this 638 page tome that kind of gets in the way of that a little bit. It's not really a problem, but when you're reviewing a book, you have to review the book and not a whole bunch of other things. So I don't know how much I actually have to say about this. Probably not an amount commensurate to the page count. Because who is this really for? Let me explain myself. When Pathfinder first emerged, it was continuity 3rd edition. It was, broadly speaking, compatible. With very little work, you could take all your old 3rd edition, 3.5 edition stuff, and you could port it into 1st edition Pathfinder pretty much as is, and you could improvise the few things that didn't really translate between the two. So it kept all your old stuff usable and directly compatible, and that was its big sell, right? That you could continue playing the game that you loved, and it would continue to get support. And if you hated 4th edition or you'd sunk a great deal of money into 3rd edition, then you could keep going. 2nd edition Pathfinder takes a considerable departure from that 3rd edition heritage, that 3.5 edition heritage, and I think that's a bit of a mistake. It's not as disastrous, but I think Pathfinder 2nd edition is Pathfinder's 4th edition, if you will. It makes a lot of changes, which reduces compatibility drastically. There are things that are familiar, but they're different in a way that can trip you up. And Pathfinder 2nd edition does really render all your now old 3rd edition and Pathfinder 1st edition material much less useful. 80 to 90% less useful, and it's a lot more work to do conversions. So I don't really know who this is for. I get that they want to depart from tugging on Wizards of the Coast's coattails quite so much, and to divorce themselves from what D&D does, because what D&D don't do, Pathfinder does, or did. But yeah, this feels like a misstep. The obvious step to me would have been to create a 5th edition retro clone as things are about to change and get drastic, and correct a lot of the issues and problems that 5th edition has to allow people to be continuity 5th edition. But it looks like other people like Cobalt Press and so on are doing that, which I don't know. The climate's different to when 4th edition came along and when Pathfinder started, but this feels like a bad decision. Probably why Pathfinder 2nd edition has not done anywhere near as well. That's a lot, and I haven't even opened the book, but that does let you know kind of where I stand on that. So you'll find all the kind of usual stuff in here, and a little bit of background to their world setting. Character creation is done through a set of interlocking templates. So you have your ancestry, which is race. Let's face it. Let's stop pandering, shall we? Your background, which is a bit more involved and more influential than backgrounds in 5th edition D&D. Your class. The skill system is still more developed than the proficiency system in 5th edition D&D. It's kind of harks back to 3rd edition, but it's somewhere between the two. It's somewhere between 3rd edition and 5th edition style skills, in that there is more depth to them, in that you can, if you wish, focus on certain skills to make yourself particularly skilled in one particular area, which is something that is missing in character customization from every edition of D&D other than the 3rd one. So I welcome that. Feats are still here, and a lot of them are tied to your ancestry and your skills. Feats in 5th edition D&D, these comparisons are going to be impossible to avoid. Feats in 5th edition D&D, nobody seems to take them, at least not at any of my tables, right? Because it's better to get your stat bonuses. So they tend to have faded into the background. Feats were often an issue in 3rd edition because there were so many of them written, especially by third parties and so on, that it was impossible to vet them all or understand how they all interacted, and they created hundreds of exceptions to the rules, which made play complicated. And by making feats so integral to skills and so on, and it really more common. I mean, it's great for character customization, but in terms of playability, it's a bit less useful. Spells and things are all broadly familiar to what you'd expect. The game rules are largely familiar, but the systems are applied in a different way. Monster stat blocks are familiar, though they're not present within this book, but they've been streamlined. That's probably the best end of what Pathfinder 2nd edition has done. It has made controlling and doing things with the baddies a hell of a lot easier to handle and to do. It is simplified that, which makes the Games Master's job a lot easier. But that doesn't compensate for all the additional complications that you get from the characters. Half-elves and half-orcs aren't presented as their own ancestries. They are presented as sort of sub-options within the human, the racial option, archetype option, ancestry option, whatever you want to call it. They've also included goblins as playable races. I guess just the popularity of Pathfinder goblins led to that. That is a weird looking halfling, but I can't quite put my finger on it. It's just kind of disturbing. I don't really know why, but that illustration gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I flip through. yeah, so you see half elves and half orcs. Yeah, they're sub-ancestry options within human. So that's a bit there. So backgrounds give you skill trainings and feats. So yet more feats. Not halfling feats. The classes, most of them are fairly typical to what you'd expect. There's a few additions. So we have alchemist, fighter, barbarian, monk, bard, ranger, champion, which is kind of paladinish, rogue, cleric, sorcerer, druid, wizard, and more are available in other books and so on. Now, I like the inclusion of alchemists and alchemy and kind of gadgeteering and so on. That's welcome to me in my fantasy, because I'm leaning more towards kind of early modern or Renaissance style settings for fantasy games. I just find it more interesting. But yeah, so you may notice that there is no sort of level table exactly. There is this much more simple table. So character progression is kind of simplified in a way, but a bit complicated in others. Every time you get to 1,000 experience points, and how easy it is to get experience points changes as you level up, obviously. Then you get to level, and at each level you get something. A lot of those somethings are feats. The rest of the things are like class abilities and so on. But you're going to end up with a shit ton of feats. They've done things in the book that makes the book easier to reference, but which is not necessarily helpful in play. Just to take one example here, this is a barbarian special ability, Mighty Rage. So Mighty Rage has a little icon to show what kind of thing it is. It has a little highlight to show the source of it. It describes the trigger, which is how it comes into play, and then the effect, which is all well and good. But when you're transcribing these things onto your character sheet, you can't cut and paste that and drop it into your character sheet all set up. Unless perhaps you're playing on Roll20 or something, then you might be able to, but don't think so. So yeah, it's a great idea. It would be useful if this was a computer game, which again it draws me back to the comparison with 4th edition. But when you're transcribing things onto your own character sheet, it's a lot less useful. I also tended to find that without the tables, in the more traditional sense, I guess, going through all of this was a bit of a chore when I sat down and made up a character. It was easy to get kind of lost in the page, despite all the titles and subtitles and things. In fact, it makes it look messy and not neat, and I actually found it made it harder to read. Easier to understand, but harder on the eyes to read the page. So classes goes on for ages because you've got all the feats and things associated with it, so let's just skip ahead a chunk. You've seen enough of the art, come on. Alright, so yeah, how far the other way do we go? Okay, all of that chunk from page 67 to, oh dear, I've already bashed the pages, to 232 is classes and all their feats and options and stuff. And you know, when you look at it like that, there's just a kind of groan. I don't know. I'm leaning towards relative simplicity in game design lately, which probably means I should do something complicated to stop myself getting too complacent. But there you go. So skills come at different levels of mastery. And that ranges from, well, the same as the difficulties. So from untrained through to legendary level. So that allows you a certain degree of skill customization. It's just not quite as customizable as it is in, say, 3rd edition. Also, every skill has things associated with it, which you may know as feats. And also, each skill has a lot of defined activities under it, which gave me horrible PTSD flashbacks to Powered by the Apocalypse moves. It all feels a little too set to me. But yeah, yet more feats. So you've got general feats, skill feats, ancestry feats, and so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. And yeah, that's... It doesn't look like a lot here, but that's because a lot of the feats are under classes. So, there you go. Yet more feats. Which, yeah, again, is the same problem. It's a similar problem to the one you get at higher level magic users. Yeah, even if you're using spell cards, right, you end up fumbling with this massive amount of cards trying to figure out what you've got memorized, what you don't. What's this spell effect? How does it interact with this, that, and the other? Oh, how does it interact with this spell? Yeah, needless complications, unfortunately. Equipment, much of a muchness with any other game. A lot of the spells are going to be familiar. So we don't really need to bother with those. Some of them have got different names. There's a few new ones. They follow this same icon tag and so on format, which is, again, easier to read, less easy to transcribe usefully. Now, unlike the main D&D core book, and I believe 1st edition Pathfinder, didn't play much of it, this does come with some background, some setting, which you don't really normally have in the core books for these things. But it's a nice introduction to all the supporting material that they have. It's explicit rather than perhaps implicit in the way the Dungeons and Dragons Player's Guide is, where it's implicitly kind of Forgotten Realmsy, but explicitly isn't anything in particular. But yeah, it's a not bad primer to the basics of the world of Golarion. I didn't necessarily find it useful. I find these are better as toolkits. I also wonder why Pathfinder hasn't come up with other worlds, other settings in the way that D&D has in the past. They seem very fixated and focused upon Golarion, which is suffering from, well, frankly, political decisions affecting creativity. It seems to me that it would be a good idea to come up with other third-party settings that might be more interesting, but yeah, all the various permutations of playing the game, you'll be familiar with the kind of thing that's there. Some generic Games Master advice. I guess some people might come to role-playing first through Pathfinder, so this kind of thing is a bit more useful in a Pathfinder core book than some others. And we have decent crafting systems which are absent in too many games. Guilty is charged as well, and treasure generation, and generally it's just a lot more characterful and interesting than a lot of the D&D stuff. And then the appendix kind of goes over the different conditions. And that's about it. There's a character sheet. Yeah, intimidating, isn't it? Oh, it gets worse. Okay, another interesting point is the index. Now, their glossary and index, as they say, doesn't just give you the page references, but it gives you a very quick one-line summary of a lot of rules and options and ideas and things from throughout the book. So if you vaguely remember something and you go to the index and you look it up, often what is here is enough to make you go, ah, right, that's how that works. So you don't actually have to go to the entry. That's tremendously useful in a big, complicated game like Pathfinder. So kudos on that. It looks like it was a lot of work, and it's not something I could be bothered to do. Right, I guess I ended up talking a lot more than I meant to. Saying I didn't have a lot to say, but I guess there's the book tour makes up for that. So, what do I think at the end of all this? In terms of style, that is, presentation and so on, I disagree with a lot of the options that they've chosen here. I think a lot of them cause a lot more confusion than clarity, and a lot of it isn't really transferable to play. You know, if you're writing out your own character sheet or tip-tapping away in Notepad or something to write off a character, all these little icons and triggers and titles and things is going to go by the wayside. It's only useful in the book, helping you to comprehend things as you read through it in the book. Not useful otherwise. The artwork is leaps and bounds ahead of anything that Wizards of the Coast has put out in a long time. A lot more stylized, a lot more interesting. Though they're falling into a lot of the same kind of traps that I think Wizards of the Coast has, Dungeons and Dragons has, in terms of depictions and cheap box-ticking exercises to make sure you cover every possible demographic in your fantasy world, which really shouldn't reflect modern Los Angeles. But hey-ho, there you go. So style 4, right? It's a big-ish company, second tier, perhaps we might say. And they've always had a strong visual design. I feel they're making compromises on it, which is bringing it down slowly, but it is still a lot more characterful, engaging, and interesting to look at than any D&D book in the last God knows how many years. In terms of substance, I mean, there's a lot there. It's virtually all rules. The flavour comes through a bit more, but that's more of a stylistic thing, so that's good. I can see why a lot of the choices were made in the way that the content was presented. It does make it easier in the book, but not easier during play, as I have belaboured that point considerably. So, and it made it a hard read on the eyes. That's very subjective, obviously. Your mileage may vary. I have terrible eyesight, and I found it a bit of a strain, and I found myself getting lost in the pages a lot, trying to read it. So in terms of substance, I mean, while there's a lot there, there's also not a lot there, and the way in which it is presented isn't necessarily the most accessible. So in terms of substance, I would perhaps give it a 3, a high 3 though. So that's 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5, bordering on a 4 out of 5. If this is your bag, your scene, then it's interesting. If you're a designer and you want to look at some presentation ideas, how to convey information, and how you can get stuck into pitfalls and so on with that, again, it's an interesting read. I just don't know who it is really for, because it is no longer Continuity 3rd edition. It is their... It is Paizo's 4th edition D&D, really. I think they made a mistake. I understand why, I understand the motivations and the desires and everything around it, but I don't think it was a very commercially sensible thing to do. Zang.
The Atomic Age, with its A-bombs, transistorized radios, jet engines, and a new breed of dangerous supervillain, requires heroes to face the challenge. That's where you come in. The world needs you, Agent. Agent of Swing.